This is False Start, the college football podcast for everyone and everyone else. I'm your host, Jon Buhler, lead writer for FanSided. As you can see, I am flying solo like a cup here today, midweek, whenever it is. I don't know what day or time it is anymore, but my absent-minded, absent co-host, Cody Williams, got my back earlier in the week. He's traveling a little bit, and he'll be back on the show for our Monday episode. But before we begin, be sure to hit that like button, smash that subscribe button, give this thing a 5-star review on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, anywhere there's podcasts. It really helps the show grow. Pay us on Buzzsprout. You can find this, link on our YouTube page, anywhere you can find it. Again, we got cars to pay for. We got to keep this, got to keep the lights on here a little bit. And without further ado, let's get rolling here with our first and 15 today with It Don't Mean Enough. Jon Sumrall doesn't do days off, and more importantly, he doesn't do spring break. Florida had its first practice after spring break, I believe on Tuesday. Yeah, all the days are kind of blending together. So, practice number 6 in the spring. Again, you really only get about 15, maybe a few extra ones if you have an incoming coach. Uh, so, every one of these is precious. But I'm going to make sure I get this absolutely right from his press conference. He let it be known that he was not happy with how the Gators players looked for the most part after spring practice. He said, practice 6 today, it looked a lot like we had spring break last week because we did. Felt a little bit like sometimes you come out of a bye week and you're trying to get the car restarted when it's been off for a few days. It's felt like that a little bit today for me. He did mention that this is a good opportunity for him to kind of get some reps with how to deal with coming off of a bye week. But he also said, some of the guys look like they had a little bit too much fun during spring break. And then obviously he addressed the elephant in the room about him, he and his wife having to cancel their trip to Italy. And he said that, it was a mutual decision. He said his wife caught some arrows for that, but he said she's all in. He said she's a better football coach. She's a better head coach's wife than he is a coach. And she was like, yeah, if you want to go to Italy, like we can't do that right now because, we got to move and do all these other jobs and everything like that. So I'm gonna take a sip of coffee real quick because it's early because this is what you got to do during March Madness and working an absurd amount of hours all the time. But I'll unpack this here in just a second because this is why it's the lead topic here. And again, you can read this all on Hail Florida Hail. Jon Sumrall has become quite a quote here since coming over to Florida. Again, he was Cody and I's favorite group of 5 head coach throughout the entire time we've been doing the show for 3+ years, both on audio and on video now. We thought the world of this guy. We thought this is a guy that goes in and elevates every program he's at, and he gets another job. So the last 4 years, he spent the 2 previous years at Tulane, took the Green Wave to the playoff. And the 2 years prior to that, he took Troy and got them ranked inside the top 25. I'm kind of starting to wonder if Jon Sumrall's energy and his tenacity, like, is he going to burn bright or burn out? Like, I wrote about this in the article. I'm like, is is this going to work for players? Like, is this as long as he practices what he preaches, then this could work for Florida. But I think he has to understand that this is a different job than what he dealt with at Tulane and Troy. Like Troy, we've talked about this all the time on the show. It's one of the better G6 jobs out there. A lot of coaches have won there. Not just Jon Sumrall, but Neil Brown won there before he fell apart at West Virginia. Larry Blakeney is a Hall of Fame head coach from his tenure with the Trojans. Obviously, Jared Parker in year 2 now had the Trojans playing for a Sun Belt championship and an outside shot at making the playoff. Tulane, Summerall goes there. He replaces Willie Fritz, who had the Green Wave, in the New Year's Six. Would have made the playoff if it was 12-team variety a couple of years ago. Now he's in Houston. And then obviously Summerall took the Green Wave to the playoff. But Florida's different. Florida's, outside of Steve Spurrier and Urban Meyer, it's been a lot of kind of high end mid. Like there have been other guys like like Doug Dickey and everything like that. Uh, but this is a program that doesn't win SEC championships without an iconic head coach. There is some level of dysfunction there baked in with whatever you have. And Summer also mentioned before, like, I'm not a patient man. I kind of want to turn things around very quickly. Well, Florida's different. And I'll say this, like, if he keeps being chirpy like this in the media and everything like that, and it's not going well for him midway through year two, they're going to turn on him. Because, like, look, if you are the end all be all of a head coach and you're not getting the results when you're really loud and really cocky about it, the media and the fan base isn't gonna buy into that. Look, I've said this a lot about SEC fans. It doesn't matter where you're at. It could be Georgia, it could be Alabama, it could be LSU, it could be Florida. Like these fans aren't dumb. These fans have been following along and rooting hard for the sport for a very, very long time. You can't be a snake oil salesman. And I'm not saying that Summerall is like Jimbo Fisher was, but like the players are the players in practice and maybe the energy is really high, but then you're coming off of spring break. You gotta Summerall is kind of expecting this to it feels like it's almost like he wants this to be a quick fix, but you've got 50 players coming in from different teams. These things are going to take time. I think in an absolute best case scenario here for Florida, you win 8 or 9 games this year. You finish the season ranked. You're not in playoff range, but you're like top what third, not top third. Yeah, top third in the SEC, if you will. Like, I don't think Florida's going to be in the playoff next year. They're not locks like Georgia or Texas. They're not in the periphery of almost there like LSU and A&M. They're not even in the same discussion as Alabama, Oklahoma, and Ole Miss. You're kind of down in that territory with Mizzou, maybe a little bit ahead of Auburn and Tennessee. And then there's the dreck of the league. I mean, I think Vanderbilt's going to be halfway decent because Clark Lee, but Mississippi State's going to have some troubles. And then obviously Arkansas and Kentucky have new head coaches, and we'll see what happens there under Ryan Silverfield and Will Stein. But I think it's just really important here to understand with Jon Sumrall that he may be a complete deviation, a complete departure from Billy Napier, but be careful what you wish for. And I'm pulling for the guy, even though I'm a Georgia guy. I think he's a good head coach, but like I think if he gets really snippy and loses a lot, you have a bunch of 7-5 seasons, people are going to turn on him. So like, I know it's spring break. I know he's got a high standard here, but like, it's kind of. I'll say this before I move on to the next topic. It's kind of like somebody who, not necessarily gets a new job, but gets like promoted from within, or like, I'll take an example. When I got hired full time at FanSided after being a paid contributor for a couple of years, you're used to working every day. You're used to kind of doing whatever it is on the grind, on the come up here. And then when you get to that situation where like, okay, I actually work a regular 9 to 5 schedule, so to speak, you don't really handle the adjustments of PTO and holidays and everything like that. Everybody in the office and everybody around you is like, take some time off, dude. Because you're gonna wear yourself out. And I did. And everybody in these roles does that eventually. Eventually they have to learn like they got to protect your mental health as much as possible because no one else is gonna do that for you. I do kind of wonder though if Summerall truly understands what he's going into as an SEC head coach. I know he played at Kentucky. I know he's from Alabama. I know he's been in New Orleans and in Alabama abound before, but like this is a different beast. I'm wishing the best of luck here, but like these are the early signs where like if it doesn't work out, this is partially why. And on that note, let's move on to our next topic here, which is some Du Hast Du Hast. Will Alabama holding A Day be enough to keep Kalen DeBoer off the hot seat? I'm going to go Du Hast 2 S's because people are going to put him on there anyway. More importantly, there's a lot to unpack here. Um, I'll say this. I'll say this as succinctly as I can after I have a sip of coffee or with Kalen DeBoer in Alabama and everything like that. So this is year three for him in Tuscaloosa. He has spent the 2 years prior to that in Washington, been at Fresno State before that, and then obviously the famed offensive coordinator working with Michael Penix Jr. there in Indiana for a year. What's important to understand here is last year's it was a little bit different in the spring. There were a lot of teams out there that didn't do spring games. They just didn't do it. The spring transfer portal window gave coaches an excuse to kind of safeguard their players, prevent them from like going out there in less than advantageous situations. Look, I'm always going to be in favor of a game because this is how you create new fans. It's expensive as hell to go to a college football game. And unless like you're a student or a wealthy alum, like it's going to be very difficult to go there. So, if you have really no tie to university, you can go to the spring game. You can go to G Day, you can go to A Day, you can go to whatever it is, go in there, check it out, get immersed in like a light version, a very positive version of a schools program. And then DeBoer last year denied Alabama fans that. Look, he did take a team to the playoff, and then the first year there, they were the first team out in 2024. But he's talking about it in his quote, and I'll pull this up here. I wrote this for Bama Hammer. He says, we always want to scrimmage and have a great spring game. Last year, we just had two position groups in particular. We wouldn't have been able to put on a good show. We need to get something out of the practice. Unfortunately, where we were at a year ago, I think we're in a different spot this year. I think that he's obviously talking about the quarterback debate. Jalen Milroe went to the NFL. Now he's back up with the Super Bowl champion Seahawks. You got Ty Simpson, you got Austin Mack coming in or him over from Washington, and then you got Keelan Russell coming out of high school. You got to have a healthy competition. Well, Simpson won out. Simpson played at a level of being a first round quarterback. He's going to get taken in the first round. He's not QB1 like Dan Orlovsky says, stepping out of the back of the end zone. He's just a really good player. I think more importantly, like the reason you're having a spring game and people are going to watch is because the optics are terrible if you don't do it. Like that's some sort of nonsense Mizzou does. And that's why nobody in the SEC really takes Mizzou seriously. Like you're acting like a MAC school. Like be an SEC, if you're the SEC, be like an SEC team. Step up to the plate, but be a man. Don't be an adult. Figure it out. The optics of Alabama not having one would be atrocious. And if Alabama didn't win like a national championship in that regard, they'd probably fire him. I know I'm being a little hyperbolic here with that, but look, it's religion there in the Yellowhammer State. And if your flagship university doesn't have the stones to have a spring game, what's that tell your fan base? Like, do you really want to invest in this? Do you really want to get behind this? You got a really good basketball team there with Nate Oates and everything like that. Again, we'll touch on some college football, college basketball crossover stuff here later on in the show. But I think really what's important to understand here is like there's not really a lot DeBoer can do in the offseason to take some of this theoretical pressure he's feeling off. He can say the right things at the podium, but like if it becomes very apparent that he's just not built for this, look, I know Cody is completely out on DeBoer. I think DeBoer is a really good head coach. He thinks be better basketball coach and everything like that. Look, it's impossible following a legend. Look, he was handpicked by Greg Byrne and kind of Nick Saban to replace Nick Saban, making the best of it. And look, even though he's not from the South, I don't think that matters because Nick Saban is from West Virginia. People in the South don't care where you're from in college football as long as you're about winning the right things. If you're not, they'll sniff you out and they'll get rid of you very quickly, like Brian Kelly was. Just saying. Like they just want to have good high-end football. I think we're talking about, yeah, it's a region of the country, but it's also kind of a national sport for them. It's not that way for everybody in the country, but like in the Southeast, they don't care where you're from. Just come here and play really good football. Um, I do think having a spring game is very positive for Alabama. I think it probably signifies that this team's probably better than we give it credit for. And again, like right now, if I were to make my 12-team playoff bracket, I don't have Alabama in. I'd have them among the first four out. Probably, I would probably say they're the third team out behind USC. No, I have USC making it. I think I have Michigan as one of the first teams out, Oklahoma, and then them, and then probably Ole Miss or BYU were kind of in that range as well. But again, I'm really high on A&M and LSU this year for some reason. I'm very high on USC as well. So I think when it comes to DeBoer and all of this, like he's got to get the he's got to grab the low-hanging fruit. He's got to get the easy wins because a lot of these wins that are going to happen this year aren't going to be the same. What happens in the event that Austin Mack just doesn't have it? What if Keelan Russell's still too green and you don't have the right quarterback situation? Obviously, I think that's the position group that's going to define his season, ultimately his tenure in Alabama. If he gets it right here, then he'll be allowed to keep going. If he doesn't, that's going to be problematic. Ah, man, that's absolutely wild. I can't believe we're debating the context of Alabama having a spring game. It's absurd here. And on that note, Kirby Smart says one thing to me. He says talk portal to me. He explained, the absolute best reason why having one transfer portal window is the best. He wrote, this was mentioned by I think Mike Griffith there on Dog Nation. He does a good job over there. Um, Here's two things you kind of said earlier in the week about the spring transfer portal window going away. Kirby Smart said, I would say the biggest investment of time in the offseason is the transfer portal and retaining your players, and that falls under roster management. In terms of this offseason, this year is different. We haven't had to do that since the portal was closed and the roster became a roster and school started. I haven't had to invest a lot of time in that because there's no second portal to retain your roster or go see about somebody else's. So we got to be able to focus a lot more on our team. This is incredibly significant, and I'm actually pretty proud of the fact that this is happening. Look, I understand that in academia and in the regular student body, you can transfer, you can go to any school you want in within the context of any semester or quarter. Like there are people who bailed after UJ after one semester. They leave in the spring, they go transfer somewhere else. I mean, I always thought less of them for leaving, and I kind of always do that in general. But again, this is a different time. This is a different sport. You need to unpack your suitcase. You can't just be an impressionable bouncing around, not handling any adversity, just picking up sky miles. But think about this. This is significant for Georgia for a multitude of reasons. One, Kirby Smart is at his alma mater. He's entering his second decade of the job, I believe. He's at about year 10 or 11 right now. Again, I can't really do the math right now. It's a little bit too early for me to think about that. But like by not having this nuisance of a second transfer portal window, once it's kind of decided and once it's kind of done, you can focus in on preparing for the next season. You don't have to have this extra energy, this extra wasted energy of trying to retain your players, like saying, "Oh, please don't go. Oh, is there somebody else out there?" Yeah, you got to do your due diligence and your little bit of homework there, but like you're not the allocation of time is not going there. It's going towards stuff that's more important. Making your own team better, spending more time with the people that actually matter at home during the off season. Obviously, coaches put their families through a lot. These are very rigorous jobs. I mean, it's a lot for me to cover sports for a living. And like these guys are actually coaching and doing all this stuff. It's different. It's not easy, but you have to love to do it because even though the college football coaches make a lot of money, it's a lot of pressure, dude. More importantly, I mean, you're the most high profile public employee in your respective state. This legislation right here is one of the things like I would say this will probably extend Kirby Smart's coaching career at Georgia by 3 to 5 years. Like I'm not being hyperbolic there. I think if you're at a place like this, and I'll say this probably applies the same to other guys at dream jobs of theirs, like Mario Cristobal at at Oregon and not Oregon, Dan Lanning at Oregon, maybe potentially Mario Cristobal at Miami. Like if guys are at their alma mater and they really have no pro aspirations, then you can stay where you're at as long as you will. Like if Mike Gundy was a slightly better head coach, maybe this would have helped him have more staying power at Oklahoma State. But again, he was there for 2 decades. When you don't have to keep constantly recruiting your own players because you're locked into whatever you have, you're not going to get burnt out. You're not entering the season completely drained. You've got something going into your cup as opposed to constantly pouring it out. And again, we all have to take care of ourselves. We all got to do a better job with our bandwidth as human beings and everything like that. Society, for whatever reason, doesn't give a rat's ass about us because this is the world that we're being simulated into, apparently. But anyway, like this tells me not just that for Georgia, like that Smart's going to have a longer tenure here, but I think this helps this helps teams that are good stay good longer. I think this improves everybody across the board, even teams that suck. Like you focus in on you focus in on what you can control. You can't control if somebody wants to leave. You can't control if somebody wants to come to you. The transactional part of this, like it's a little bit too much. But at this point of the year, once you kind of get past the transfer portal window, which is like, before the start of spring semester, because that's logical, you focus in on that and your guys, they get better. You know, they lock it, they unpack their suitcase. It's like, okay, I'm going to be here for a year. I'm going to be here from January to at least January, bare minimum. And if I'm not happy, then maybe I don't have to play or whatever it is. But this allows the coaches to level up. This allows the players to level up. This allows everybody to grow together. And I think that we live in a very divisive world in that this is a positive sign in that direction. You know, Cohesiveness, togetherness. And Kirby Smart, I think, he's a very smart dude. I know he talks like a thick Southern accent. He's from Bainbridge, Georgia. I get it. I mean, but he also is a finance major at Georgia with great grades. Um, he takes stuff that's complicated and really simplifies it that everybody can understand. He's elite at that. He's such a great communicator and everything like that. And then that's the other thing. Like your best attributes as a coach get to be used more because you don't have to deal with this extra transfer portal nonsense. Like rather than wasting energy on dealing with your fourth string tackle if he's going to transfer to some random power four school that doesn't matter, you can focus in on like developing these guys. You can focus on how to motivate better. You can watch a little bit more film. You can get that the little extra edge, that difference. If I'm not saying this would have made the difference for Georgia last year because that was a very young team, but rather than trying to recruit their own players, maybe that makes all the difference, and that's why they beat Ole Miss for the second time in the Sugar Bowl and finally advance in the 12-team playoff as opposed to going home disappointed in the season prematurely. But again, this isn't going to go away. This is really good for the sport, and I'm happy for Smart to kind of be straightforward about that. And I think that's only a good thing. And on that note, let's get to our second half of the show today here with some Goldilocks. FanDuel put out this really interesting graphic late in the day, the very late edition to the show, about the best college football and basketball coaching duos out there. I'll take a sip of coffee, I'll rattle them off, and I'll say among these 10 who's properly ranked and who's not, who they too hot on, too cold, and just right on. So at number one, they've got Houston with Willie Fritz and Kelvin Sampson. Two, they've got Duke with Manny Diaz and John Shire. Three, Kalen DeBoer and Nate Oates at Alabama. Four, Josh Heupel and Rick Barnes at Tennessee. Five, you got Kyle Whittingham and Dusty May at Michigan. Six, Clark Lee and Mark Byington at Vanderbilt. Seven, Kirk Ferentz and Ben McCollum at Iowa. Eight, Jon Sumrall and Todd Golden at Florida. Nine, Steve Sarkisian and Sean Miller at Texas. And rounding out the top 10, Kirby Smart and Mike White at Georgia. So I've got three that I think FanDuel's too hot on, three it's too cold, four that are just right. And I would say the team that I think just missed the cut that I would probably say is Oregon with Dan Lanning and Dana Altman. I think Oregon had such an awful basketball season that that really hurts them there. So I think that they're too hot on. I think that they're too hot on Iowa, Houston, and Alabama. Iowa at seven. Look, this is why I think it's too hot. I think Kirk Ferentz is holding the Hawkeyes hostage. I think he's been there for a really long time, won a couple of Big Ten championships before anybody playing college football now is alive. I think Ben McCollum is a really fantastic head coach there at Iowa, but he's in year one. And then again, he did do something that I don't think Fran McCaffrey ever did during his 15 years tenure at Iowa City and getting to the Sweet 16. I think that McCollum is buoying Ferentz here because again he had a really good success with Drake and everything. But I think Ferentz like look, Kirk Ferentz is a Hall of Fame level head coach, but he's nowhere near a top 10 coach in college football. So I think that like we're dealing with a little bit of recency bias here. That would probably be the one team that I would knock out of this top 10 and put Dana Altman and Dan Lanning in there as well. I think Houston at one is a little bit rich as well. Not terribly. Like I have them in the top five. I think Willie Fritz is a really good head coach. I think Kelvin Sampson's a very strong head coach as well. But like, I'm not going to say like, what have they won? I mean, Kelvin Sampson was a possession away from winning a national championship at Houston. Willie Fritz did great things at Tulane, but like, what really has Fritz done at Houston to this point to merit him be the first name that I read across this graphic? Like Tulane's good, but like Houston, like if Houston has a really good year this year and which I think that they will, and I'll touch on that here, later on the show, but having them at number one's a little bit rich. I'd probably have them, three. And then the last one that I have, um, Alabama. I don't know if I have them in the top five. I think it's like, look, I think that they've got this. It's one of the first tandems you think of here with DeBoer and Oates. But like you're kind of wondering with both if not necessarily that their best days are behind them, because obviously Nate Oates has the Crimson Tide in the Sweet 16. He's taken to their first Final Four ever. He's the best basketball coach in the program history. DeBoer took Washington to the national championship a couple years ago. But like you got to be really honest with yourself. Of the other coaches that are in here, like I don't know if either of them are going to take Alabama and win a national championship. I could be wrong here in a couple days. I would be stunned. But coming into March Madness, Alabama was a team that I thought, yeah, I could Sweet 16, whatever. They've got a tough matchup with Texas Tech and what have you. But like, and they got to play Michigan now, and that's gonna be tough sledding here. I know DeBoer, I think, could win a national championship at his next job. I think there's challenges here at Alabama. Whereas, you look at Kelvin Sampson, he almost did. John Shire could win it this year. Um, and then obviously there's other coaches on this list like Steve Sarkisian hasn't won a national championship, but I think he could. And this is a lot, honestly, kind of buoyed a lot by the basketball coaches. Because again, we only have one guy on here who's won one. That's Kirby Smart. Like you don't see Ryan Day, you don't see Kurt Signetti, you don't see Davis Swinney on here. Even though I think Clemson kind of got jabbed here a little bit. I think Brad Brownell is a pretty good head coach as well. Jake Diebler is kind of holding Ryan Day back, but he's relatively new. And then obviously Darian DeVries is still relatively new to um, Indiana, a less successful version of Ben McCollum. And as far as where I think that they're too cold, I think it's Michigan, Texas, and Florida. I think Dusty May is damn good. I think Michigan might win it all this year. The guy took Florida Atlantic. He took FAU to a Final Four a couple years ago. Who does that? And then Kyle Whittingham, an iconic coach there at Utah, kind of got forced out. Cody touched on that, which was like the divorce was a little bit more tumultuous than we probably envisioned or realized at the time. But like you're talking about the best head coach who hasn't led a team to a playoff yet there in Whittingham when he was at Utah now in Michigan. I've got Michigan like right there on the cut there this year. Honestly, like if Michigan were to like I had Michigan probably one or two. I don't know if maybe not maybe one. I don't know, I think Manny Diaz and Shire is a little bit better, but it's very, very, very close. But I think that they're getting a little bit too low there. Florida at 8. Okay, like Todd Golden's won a national championship. Granted, he lost to Iowa with some very questionable coaching down the stretch in the Sweet 16, but like, look, most people that win March Madness one year don't typically win it the next year. Obviously, Jon Sumrall's had a lot of success there at the G5 level, but he's coming into Florida. We touched on him with the opening segment on the top of the show. I'd probably have them maybe up like 7, maybe 6. I don't know if they're super high up, but like I'd probably take them over Iowa, even though McCollum beat Golden. I don't know. I think it's. I feel like there's room to grow with Florida more so than Iowa. Like we've seen the best days under Kirk Ferentz, and then obviously with Ben McCollum, like it can keep going, but like you're kind of like you're in such untrodden territory there for the Hawkeyes, whereas like making the playoffs not anything that Summerall can't do. Winning national championships not something that Golden can do. And then with Texas with Sarkisian and Miller, look, I think Texas is going to be really really good there in football this year. As far as Sean Miller is concerned, I mean, he took the Longhorns, who were a first four team. Now they're playing in the Sweet 16. They got an outside shot of beating Purdue. I think they're only like a 6 point underdog. They pass the ball now. I think Sarkisian does a really good job of making his offense multidimensional. I think he gets his guys to play really hard on defense. I think he shrinks in play calling. He's a little bit like Kyle Shanahan of college football. I'll say that. Cody, that's going to make Cody so mad. But look, Texas is a bona fide lock to make the college football playoff this year. They could win the SEC. They might. I'd still probably take Georgia because Georgia's owned them since they've joined the league. But at the same time, like I'd be stunned if Texas doesn't make the playoff this year. I'd probably have I'd have Texas probably a couple spots higher. And then as far as like where I think it's just right, I'm okay with where Duke, Tennessee, Vanderbilt, and Georgia are at. So with Duke. obviously, like I think that they should be in the top tier. Manny Diaz is a fantastic head coach. I I look at him like he won the ACC last year. Like, come on, man. Like Duke won a football championship. John Shire's obviously handpicked to replace Coach K. He's got Duke in the Sweet 16. Could be looking at a national championship run. I think Duke might come up a little bit short there because I don't necessarily think they've got the depth of the rotation to navigate it. The tournament's a gauntlet and everything like that. But like Shire's going to win a national championship at his alma mater sooner or later. I don't know if Diaz is ever going to do that at Duke because that's just not what it's built at. But like I'll be straight with you. I think he kind of got a raw deal at Miami. Yes, I understand. Yeah, he may be like the son of a politician there. And then they bring in one of your own, Mario Cristobal. If Florida State had half a brain, they'd move on from Mike Norvell at the end of the year and hire Manny Diaz, bring him back to alma mater. Manny Diaz would turn Florida State into a powerhouse very, very quickly. Guy's a fantastic head coach. I think the world of him. I think he's one of the most underrated head coaches in college football. Then you got who else you got in here? Tennessee, uh, Josh Heupel and Rick Barnes. I think in terms of like, beyond Diaz and Shire at Duke and Oates and DeBoer at Alabama, this is one of the first pairings you would think of. Rick Barnes has been an institution in Tennessee and Texas previously for a very long time. Maybe took Texas to a Final Four, has had Tennessee be really good for a while. They were obviously back in the Sweet 16. Um, then Heupel's taken Tennessee was terrible prior to him taking over, helped them make the playoff, bunch of 10-win seasons, pulled back a little bit last year. They were still, ranked caliber team, beat a bunch of crappy teams who couldn't beat anybody good. Again, I think more so with Alabama. I think there's a definite ceiling. I don't think either of them are going to win a national championship at their respective schools. Barnes is getting up there in age. Heupel, right now I think there's been so many coaching changes in the SEC. He's been depreciated a little bit, but obviously I think he's got to develop the fastball offensively. His offense, the air raid offshoot is just way too gimmicky. And I think if you're trying to be good in this day and age, like the SEC defense isn't really anybody who's good is going to figure you out, whether that be, Georgia, whether that be Ohio State, whether that be who have you. How do you continue to get to how do you get to the level that like Oregon's at now? Can you sustain that? I don't know. I'm not entirely sure, but I think that like, this is what Danny White's got a pretty good athletic department. We'll touch on his brother Mike here in a little bit too. And then obviously Vanderbilt with six. Maybe six is a tad high, but like I didn't feel comfortable like saying, okay, who's going to be ahead of them? Clark Lee's at his alma mater. Mark Byington's done great things on the hardwood. Again, I think this is a little bit more of recency bias, but like again, the way people rave about Clark Lee in college football and Mark Byington on the hardwood, like people who know ball think the world of these guys. And Vanderbilt's not easy, and I think that like that's very important to understand here. This isn't like Duke's neck power too, but it's also a traditional power in basketball. Vanderbilt's not that. Vanderbilt's a baseball school, and we're talking about the two other head coaches beyond them. If you were to throw Vanderbilt baseball in here, I mean that's top of the list right here, dude. Vanderbilt's been fantastic. And then obviously with Georgia, I'm glad to see Georgia crack the top 10, not just because it's my team, my fandom and everything like that. But how do you like this list would be null and void if you don't have the best college football head coach on here. Look, I think Kirby Smart is definitely bringing Mike White up. I've got my thoughts on Mike White. Again, I said he's like the Billy Napier for Georgia. Um, but Mike White does get the team to the tournament. Georgia basketball is in its best spot in a very long time. You're winning 20 games a year. You're making the tournament. It can be a fun product to watch at times, but also at the same time, it can be incredibly frustrating. It's like watching, Gus Malzahn hurry up and run Auburn. There's limitations to this, but like this list would have been insane if Georgia wasn't on there. But then again, I can't definitively put them higher than anybody else. I mean, maybe ahead of Iowa. That's about it. And on that note, let's move on to our penultimate topic here with some 4 for 4. ESPN's Bill Connolly put out one of his best articles of the year, his returning production metrics for the Power Four or college football. I think 168 teams now that you got North Dakota State and somebody else joining the league. Again, I'm trying to figure out exactly who he's got on here at the top of it. Yeah, we are at 100 and 38, with North Dakota State and Sacramento State joining. North Dakota State going to the Mountain West, Sacramento State going to, I think, the MAC, I think at this point, but just all 138 as FBS teams, 138, 168. So basically, what I'm going to do is go through teams that are ranked really high, where they've got a lot of high end production, like basically teams that are ranked preferably in the top 10, 25, 50 if I got to go down, where I think it matters for them and where I don't think it matters. Like where like having a lot of players coming back is a good thing for these teams and where it's bad. So try to spend a whole hell of a lot of time on this because it's got stuff to do here my day off before I half day off before I go to work at 1. Um, I think in the ACC it matters that SMU is at 23 and Virginia is at 36. SMU is the program that I think everybody and their brother is like, if anybody's going to be able to challenge Miami this year, it might be the Mustangs. They made the playoff 2 years ago. They've got Kevin Jennings back for another year. Yes, I think you lose I think Casey Woods, the offensive coordinator, he's taking over there, I think at like Toledo or I forget their OC from this past year left for a G5 job. And then Brett Lashley's still there. SMU was playoff viable for a while there in the ACC. Brett Lashley has been a fantastic head coach. He's really given the program a really strong identity. I think he'll coach him up. And I think more importantly, like with the ACC kind of being in flux, I think them having, one of the higher returning margins of anybody in the conference, I think that serves the Mustangs. Similarly with Virginia, a little bit further down at 36. And for the record, that's the lowest percentage of returning production of any team that I'm mentioning here. I think it's significant because this is going to allow people, it shows people are buying into what Tony Elliott is selling. This is a team that should have won the ACC last year, should have made the playoff, but they fell apart in the rain versus Duke for only something I can only describe as Chandler Morris reasons. But like clearly the plan that the Cavaliers have implemented, where like they're going to go portal heavy, they're going to spend a lot of money, they're going to get big pocketed boosters. It just shows alignment and it shows an appreciation for Elliott because I think they are of the belief of this. This is something that I think is very true. If and when Dabo Swinney retires, goes to Alabama, what have you, this is the guy who Clemson hires immediately because he goes back to alma mater. He's had success at a much more difficult job in the conference. It just kind of shows that like it's a slow build. This is a guy that it's a foxhole guy that you can win with. And again, how he handled the tragedy at the end of what the 21, 22 season. Again, I'm trying to remember what that was, but like the way that he handled that carried a lot of clout with people in Charlottesville. And I think Virginia's going to be a very good year. Where it doesn't matter in the ACC is Virginia Tech at 4 and Syracuse at 27. With Virginia Tech, you're bringing over a lot of people from Penn State. And again, I do think Virginia Tech has a decent shot of having a really, really good season. I'm not ruling that out at all, but like there's just so many moving pieces here where like what's up? What's the ground? What's the floor? You fire Brent Bryant, you bring him back on staff as defensive coordinator. Like that's the most insane thing I've ever heard. But that's this is college football. This is why we love the sport so much. It's one of those ones where like I got to figure out what the hell is going on, and that's kind of going to be a trend for a lot of the teams that I don't think it matters. And then obviously with Syracuse, you're bringing back a lot of production off a team that sucked. Look, I understand Steve Angeli getting hurt wrecked your season very early on. Ricky Collins wasn't it. You are coming off 2 years ago, you had a really good first year with Fran Brown there with Kyle McCord as your quarterback. And again, I want to see Syracuse succeed because that's obviously a Kirby Smart guy with Fran Brown. But like, I, I'm not going to put a lot of stock into what Syracuse Orange football does moving forward because like, for lack of a better word, like until I see them consistently be better, he may have just survived a Dino Babers dead cat bounce. Moving on to the Big Ten, I think it matters that Oregon's at 11 and USC is at 13. These are two programs that I think are playoff viable. Look, I know Oregon is, and I believe USC might be. Mentioned this on a previous show that Oregon bringing back a lot of productivity. Like a lot of guys could have turned pro. They decided to come back to school for one more year. This makes Oregon a very dangerous team. Look, I think Ohio State's the team to beat in the Big Ten this year. I think Indiana pulls back, but then again, Indiana just may be inevitable. But like I think Oregon, like I'm not saying like this is the year they got to win a national championship, but it's more closer to what it was in 24, where like that's your year to do it versus last year where I never really kind of bought into them. This is an opportunity for Dante Moore to go out, win a Heisman Trophy, and be the number one overall pick by the Jets or the Dolphins, whatever sad crab bag of crab team. Maybe come to the Falcons. I don't know. I think we'll be okay. Probably not. We'll see. I'll do Blog and Dirty later. Definitely check that show out. And then with USC at 13. I think this is Lincoln Riley's best team he's had in a couple of years. This isn't just Caleb Williams booing a team. This is a team that like has leveled up a little bit more in terms of Big Ten play. I'm never going to root for Lincoln Riley, but I am going to root for this team. I think Gary Patterson being the defensive coordinator helps. I think Jade Mailava being at quarterback certainly elevates the floor for them. You kind of have a little bit more of a blue collar ethos, which what makes USC good. So again, I'm very bullish on the Trojans this year. Where it doesn't matter is Maryland at 2 and Nebraska at 3. Maryland was trash last year. Maryland has Malik Washington, which I think he's a special player. I think Mike Locksley is more than living on borrowed time as the Terrapins head coach. Again, James Smith is entering year 2 as the head coach there for the Terrapins. And obviously, basketball did not go very good this year for them in the wake of Kevin Willard leaving. So Maryland's got to find an identity. And I would not be stunned if like the Terps made a change here very quickly. It's going to come down to how well Malik Washington plays. I think he's going to be great, but like I don't think he really full realizes his potential until a different staff comes in that can play like a defense. Then obviously with Nebraska at 3, you lose Dylan Raiola to Oregon. He's going to be dealing with rehab on his knee. You bring in you got TJ Lateef at quarterback. You bring in Anthony Calandria from UNLV. There's the Matt Rule of it all, and that scares me. I, I don't I don't view Nebraska as a top third team in the Big Ten, maybe top half. But at that point, like go be Tennessee, and they're not quite there. They're at what Tennessee is now versus what Tennessee was a couple years ago. And the Big 12, where I think it matters, I think it's Houston at 17 and BYU at 18. Again, I said at the top earlier in the program, the previous segment, that I think this is going to be a very good year for Willie Fritz and the Cougars. You got to deal with the Connor Wegman of it all. I'm not saying Houston's going to win the Big 12 because I think Texas Tech is just so good. But you're in that discussion with like BYU, Utah, Arizona State, Baylor, Arizona, where like, you know what? I think that you're going to be a worthy adversary to the Red Raiders. And if all goes according to plan, the Big 12 might get 2 teams in the playoff, and I think Houston might be among them. BYU at 18, not as much as I would say as Houston, because you have a lot of guys internally with just the nature of BYU, the Cougars, the LDS regional or national attachment you have to that program. Bear Bachmeier's back. Bear Bachmeier's in his second year. The playbook opens up a little bit more. Kalani Sitake got a big raise, so he wouldn't go be coaching at Penn State, and that's how the cookie crumbles there. And in Provo, I think BYU is going to be really good. I think if the Big 12 gets a second team, it's probably going to be them, but we'll see. And then where I think I did this all wrong. Okay, I put Minnesota and UCLA for the Big 12. That's not right here. Where I don't think it matters in the Big 12 is UCF at 29, and then I would also say Kansas State at 38. Um, UCF still has Scott Frost. And I think that's problematic because anytime you're trying to go in the past for the good old days in your present, you're going to be disappointed and have diminishing returns. The roster is in a really bad spot. Maybe UCF pushes forward here, but like I'm not looking at them like being anything more than like a borderline bowl team. They seem to be further behind in the realignment versus BYU, which is thriving, and UCF or in Houston, which is on the come up. Again, I'm not really high on Cincinnati. I think that they probably need to move on from Scott Satterfield and hire Luke Fickell again. And we'll see what happens there. And obviously with Kansas State, you've got Colin Klein coming back to alma mater from Texas A&M. Really one of the best quarterbacks to play for Bill Snyder alongside Michael Bishop from a generation prior, probably two. But like you're you're banking on the fact that the culture that Chris Kleiman had in place there in Manhattan is going to translate over to Klein. That's a lot. Maybe it will, but like I like Texas A&M a lot last year because of Elka more so than Klein. So like I mean Holloman Wiggins is the OC. Like I think that's his name, Holman Wiggins, I think. Doesn't matter. Very high on A&M because I'm a big fan of Elko and Reed. Klein, who I loved when he was, he's my peer when he was playing at K-State. This is a big opportunity for him, and I hope they get to a bowl game, but like I'm not expecting a whole hell of a lot of the Wildcats this year. And then obviously, let's move on to the SEC. I think it matters a lot for Texas at 6 and Georgia at 8. Again, these are two teams that I think are serious national championship contenders. They're among the 8 teams that I think can do it this year, along with like who I think could actually win a national championship. Texas, Georgia, Oregon, Ohio State, Notre Dame, maybe, Miami, Texas Tech. I go back and forth on if Indiana can. I'll say that they can. There may be a few other teams out there, but those are all teams that I kind of view as playoff locks at this time. I think when you have a lot of production coming back for Georgia and Texas, you got a Georgia team that like was very youthful a year ago. It's not losing a lot of talent to the NFL draft. You're bringing a lot back this year. Didn't suffer really any major coordinator attrition. The last 2 years ended very a sour note. I think you're going to be charged up here. Last year's team was really well coached up. They just didn't have it in the end. And then obviously with Texas, a lot of big changes there. You bring in a Will Muschamp, I guess, from Georgia by way of Vanderbilt to replace Pete Kwiatkowski as defensive coordinator. We'll see if that improves things. But, Arch Manning's back for year 2. He's undisputed, Heisman candidate, what have you. I think as long as Texas can run the football, they'll be really good, really tough to beat here. And where I don't think it matters is Florida at 10 and Tennessee at 26. Again, Florida is kind of in the same sort of boat. It's the same thing that I said about Virginia Tech, and I would have said about UCLA at 9, where like it's a new coaching regime coming in. You're bringing a lot of different players, maybe not as many like guys from Penn State going to Virginia Tech as Tulane guys going to Florida. But like Jon Sumrall's got to make the pieces fit. He's putting in all the hours, working every hour of every day, and never taking a day off because it's that important. And again, I think I'm higher on what Florida can do this year than I probably should be. But at the same time, like that was not a good team a year ago, and they got to make some major changes. And then with Tennessee at 26, again, this is going to be a bottom half team in the SEC. You lose Joey Aguilar to eligibility. You see if Faison is going to be anything at quarterback. You see if Martin Luther Staub, maybe George McIntyre the third, if it can make things happen here. But again, they're bringing in Jim Knowles defensively. I think that does help the Vols, but like the offense has to level up, and I'm not entirely sure. So again, I'll recap this real quick. I think it matters with returning production in the ACC with SMU and Virginia. It doesn't matter with Virginia Tech and Syracuse. In the Big Ten, it matters with Oregon and USC. It doesn't matter with Maryland and Nebraska. In the Big 12, it matters with Houston and BYU, not so much with UCF and Kansas State. And the SEC, it matters with Georgia and Texas, not so much with Florida and Tennessee. And on that note, let's remember some dudes. I'm going to remember some dudes from the playoff because we are in the heart of March Madness. We are entering the second weekend. I want to go through 4 guys that I think played parts in their teams winning national championships. That like I think about this era like maybe they're in the news for a little bit different reasons now or whatever it is, but like they're legends of their respective alma mater because of what they did. And I'm going to start with Alabama Crimson Tide tight end OJ Howard. This is a big body guy. I remember him playing, in the early playoff days when it was basically Alabama versus Clemson every year. He had a monster game. I forget what year it was. It could have been what, 15, I think. Yeah, it would have been 15, kind of that 15, 16 range, I think. Yeah, because in 17, yeah, 17 you beat Georgia with the two to Devontae Smith pass. I almost mentioned Devontae Smith, but like OJ Howard is one of those guys where like this was one of the best days of his life. Like he was a good player, not insanely productive, but like what he did I think I remember versus Clemson, just Brent Venables just really had no answer for that, and played a huge part there in those, some of those Nick Saban teams that won national championships. Phenomenal player there for the Crimson Tide. He played for like the Bills and the Bucks. I don't even know if he's still in the league, but like there was a minute there where he had like a tight end performance akin to like what ja Jackson Smith and Jigba had versus Utah in the Rose Bowl, like stuff that like just jumps off the page immediately. Moving on, I'm going to talk about Georgia Bulldogs cornerback Keely Ringo. I almost mentioned Stetson Bennett the fourth. I almost mentioned Brock Bowers. Keely Ringo had the pick six to ice the game of Bryce Young to win the national championship in 2021 up in Indianapolis, Georgia's first national title in 41 years. Keely Ringo, obviously a very unique, interesting name. I think he came to the team via Scottsdale by way, I think, of Tacoma, Washington. Played only 3 years, or he was on the roster for 3 years. Just a very unique college football career. Five-star every bit coming out. During spring practice, as his true freshman year, he tore his labrum and just couldn't play that all year. Meanwhile, his mom, Miss Tracy, was dealing with a lot of health issues at that time, and she and Dog Nation like she really supported each other, a lot of this time and everything like that. And always think very highly of Ringo and his family and everything like that. Comes to Georgia, and this is a sophomore year. He starts playing a little bit, maybe his redshirt freshman, if you will, making a lot of things happen. Like this guy's immensely talented. There've been a lot of great defensive backs over the years. I would say at Georgia, certainly one of them. I think like obviously Malachi Starks just built a little bit differently. Try to think who else. You've had a lot of other guys that have been really good at Georgia, but like that's kind of the ones that really stands out. Again, this is a position group that Kirby Smart coaches up. He has that pick six. And then, the next year he comes back and then, I think he won two national titles, beat TCU. That year he kind of got a lot of flack. He would do get a little handsy out the perimeter, a lot of PIs, a lot of dirty laundry, a lot of yellow flags. But obviously, when you talk about the greatest plays in Georgia football history, this is at the top, if not the top. Look, I know people are going to talk a lot about, Buck Belue, Lindsey Scott to beat Florida back in 1980. Obviously, you got Herschel Walker running over the Tennessee linebacker. You've obviously got, Hobnail boot over Tennessee. But and then obviously there's other amazing plays. I'm probably just blanking on this right now because I'm thinking about like this is a play that like it doesn't matter how big of a Georgia fan you are, you know this play, you know what this is about. And obviously, I distinctly remember it happening. Collapsing on my floor in absolute jubilation back in just my old apartment a few blocks down the road here in Virginia Highland. Just an amazing moment there. But Keely Ringo always gave us that, and I'll always be grateful for it. And then the last two I'm going to mention here, I'm going to go with Ohio State Buckeyes quarterback Will Howard. I always like redemption acts. This is a guy who transferred from Kansas State because they're like, okay, we got Avery Johnson. We got to play him over you. So this is a guy that, led Kansas State to a Big 12 championship. TCU didn't win it that year. Remember that back in 22. K-State did. So Howard transfers like a year later or something like that and goes to Ohio State. And obviously he's in a loaded offense. Chip Kelly's calling the plays. He's handing the ball off to Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins in the backfield, throwing the ball out, to any number of receivers like Emeka Egbuka, Jeremiah Smith's a freshman, Carnell Tate's on this team, Brandon Ennis, what have you. You have two losses during the year. You lose to you lose to Michigan, and then you have that tough loss there versus Oregon and Eugene, where he had a slide, or he didn't know how much time was on the clock or whatever. Very embarrassing moment for him. Then he turns it around. Ohio State doesn't play in the Big Ten championship. They play Tennessee in the first round game, beat the snot out of them, cracked not Tua Tagovailoa, Nico Iamaleava's helmet, and that was the last game he played for the Vols. Now at UCLA because the spring transfer portal was a thing. Then you go and you beat Oregon like a drum in the Rose Bowl. I remember coming back with my fiance back when she was my girlfriend from the Peach Bowl, watching Arizona State play a really great game with Texas, and just looking at the scoreboard, I'm like, Ohio State is just slaughtering Oregon. Then you go on, you play better versus what Texas in the Cotton Bowl. And then you have a great, phenomenal game versus Notre Dame, the national championship in Atlanta. Just a guy that like, look, we'll talk about that, the Ohio State national championship. And again, Ohio State just wins singular. They don't repeat. It's a different sort of culture. It's the best football program in the country, but for whatever reason, winning national championships back to back is just not in the cards for them for some reason. Maybe it'll change it before I no longer live here anymore in this world. We got plenty of time. We're good. I'm only 36. Anyway, like Will Howard was the type of player that like just they don't win a national championship without him. I think that he really just kind of, for as talented as Ohio State is, they needed a steadying presence at quarterback, and I'll always respect him for that. And then finally, a guy who I think is probably the biggest star of any of these guys at the next level. Let's talk about former Clemson defensive lineman Christian Wilkins. Obviously, he's kind of more in the news about like his contract with like the Raiders. Obviously, got drafted by like the Dolphins or something. But I want people to remember this because I think it's going to get lost to time. And again, this was earlier on in my writing career, probably like 6, 7, 8 years ago. When Clemson was at the peak of its powers under Dabo Swinney from 2014 to 2020, like basically the start of Deshaun Watson at quarterback and ending with Trevor Lawrence turning pro, like just that window of those two quarterbacks, maybe there was a Kelly Bryant a little bit in there before Trevor Lawrence was actually ready. Clemson, yes, had great quarterback play, had great coordinators and everything like that. But the reason that this team was so good is because they had SEC caliber players in the trenches. You had Cleveland Farrell, you had Dexter Lawrence, you've Brian Bresee, you've had a bunch of other players as well up there. But Peter Woods now doesn't matter. Christian Wilkins, I think, was the one guy that I felt that they had was just like this is something that Alabama, Georgia, whomever, LSU, whoever they play, it doesn't matter. I'm probably mixing playoffs up, but like with Christian Wilkins was in the middle of it all for Clemson, it was just like, yeah, this is just a different level. This is going to be problematic for anyone and everyone that they play. And again, like that probably embodies more so what it takes to win a national championship. Like you look at all these teams that end up winning it, they've got guys in the trenches. Like Ohio State back in 14, yeah, you had Joey Bosa. In Georgia, you had what, guys like Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter. And Michigan's had guys too. Like it's all really significant. Obviously, this is the guy for Clemson and everything like that. Yeah, and on that note, this was episode 262 of False Start. You can follow me, Jon Buhler, on Twitter at X at Buhler118. You can follow my absent-minded, absent co-host, Cody Williams, at the Sizzle20. You can follow along with the show on Twitter at CFB False Start. Like, rate, listen, subscribe, review on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, anywhere there's podcasts. Give us a 5-star review. Really helps the show grow. Pay us on Buzzsprout. You can. You don't have to. It's we just say it. And then Cody and I will be back on the show later in the week, for our Monday episode and everything like that. Our schedules are going to line up a little bit more. It's crazy here with March and everything like that. And then, in less than a month, me and my fiance are going to go to Germany. So Cody's going to be manning the fort for a little while, kind of like I did when he was at the Super Bowl and he got sick. So that's kind of what I got for you guys here today. Once again, thanks for listening. And this is False Start.